I was sweating like a bull, shaking all over, but somehow feeling like the happiest man alive. I had become a fighter pilot. When you are out there, lined up on a train and firing at it, sometimes the whole thing blows up right in your face, and you find yourself flying straight through a wall of fire. All you can say is, whoa. Before I get into the rest of this story, let me tell you something real quick. My name is Josh, and I run Memoirs of World War II with my family. We travel across the country meeting the last living veterans of the Second World War. We sit with them, listen to their memories, and share them so people never forget what they went through and what they did for all of us. Everything we do is supported by donations from folks like you. Some people help through Patreon, choosing whatever amount they feel comfortable giving, and others donate through our website. The links are down in the description if you want to take part in preserving this history. Thank you for being here. Now, let us get back to our veteran story. By the year 1941, the war had already spread across Europe, Asia, and Africa. The United States kept saying we would stay out of it, but deep down I felt it was only a matter of time before the war reached us. Back when I was in high school, all of us talked tough and said we would never serve. We joked that we would just run as far as we could. Honestly, we had no idea where we thought we were going. But then Pearl Harbor happened. Overnight, everything changed. All my buddies enlisted, and I went in the very next day and signed up as an aviation cadet. My dad had a friend we always called Uncle Jake. His real name was Percival Dexter Jacobs, and he had flown in the First World War. He used to tell me, if another war ever breaks out, make sure you fly. That stuck with me. From the time I was a kid, all I ever dreamed about was sitting in the cockpit of a fighter plane. When I arrived at Maxwell Field, that was where they decided whether you were going to be a pilot, a navigator, or a bombardier. My hands were never steady enough to be a bombardier, and while I was decent at mathematics, I was not great at it, so I did not fit the navigator path either. That left pilot, which was exactly what I had hoped for. I headed down to Lafayette, Louisiana, to train in the PT-17 Stearman, a little biplane. I was terrible at flying that thing. Honestly, I should have been washed out, but my instructor pulled me through it. From there we went to Craig Field in Selma, Alabama, and trained in the AT-6. I had no trouble with that airplane at all. Graduation came on January 14th, 1943. We all raised our right hands, said, "I do." And suddenly we were second lieutenants. Afterward, we walked out onto the flight line, and my instructor, Lieutenant Guerrero, looked right at me and said, "Hallett, you're going to fly the P-40 today." I stared at him and said, "I am going to do what?" He repeated it. "You are flying the P-40. I thought, well, all right, this must be the day I die. I had just earned my wings, just gotten my commission, and now I was convinced this airplane was going to kill me. But I climbed in anyway. I had my right leg stretched out straight, trying to fight the torque of that engine. The rudder was all the way to the right. Taxiing felt like trying to steer the Empire State Building with that long nose blocking everything in front of me. They told me to make my first turn at 500 feet. I do not think I let go of anything until I was closer to 5,000. I did some basic flying around the area, then headed back to land. I overshot the runway, but managed to stay calm enough to go around again. Finally got it down on the ground. It was December 14th, cold as could be, and there I was, sweating like a bull and shaking my head. But I felt incredible. I had flown a P-40. I was a fighter pilot. Later on, orders came through. They needed a handful of men for the P-38, and that was exactly what I wanted. In May of 1944, I was shipped off to the United Kingdom. I started flying missions across the English Channel, getting ready for the Allied invasion of Western Europe, the operation that would become one of the biggest turning points of the entire war. I was assigned to the 9th Air Force. I flew several missions before the invasion began, mostly armed reconnaissance, hunting down trains and convoys, tearing up anything we could find on the ground. Then the day of the invasion came. You know, when you are living in that moment, it does not feel like history. You are just focused on doing your job. I remember looking down and thinking, my gosh, there were so many ships that it hardly looked real. Then I watched those soldiers hitting the beaches and found myself wondering if I would have the courage to do what they were doing. Those men had guts I could hardly imagine. Sitting in a cockpit, I felt grateful to be in the air, but I kept asking myself where they found the strength to keep moving forward under that kind of fire. Their courage still amazes me to this day. And yet, they did it. They went. After the invasion, our unit moved across the continent. We moved as the troops moved, setting up wherever they advanced. A few missions stuck with me over the years. Getting shot at never becomes routine, no matter how many times it happens. One time I was finally leading a flight. I looked down and spotted a convoy hiding in the woods. I thought, perfect. A curve of pursuit just right for us to swing down and tear every one of them apart. I was flying a P-38. I made my strafing run, and like a fool, I pulled up too soon. No one had fired at me while I was coming in low, but the moment I climbed, that was exactly what they were waiting on, somebody dumb enough to pull up right in front of them. They shot out my right engine, and something blasted through the canopy. Whatever it was hit my goggles and ripped them clean off my face. I saw red everywhere, and without thinking, I grabbed the microphone button and shouted something like, "Good grief," or maybe worse. I said, "Jesus Christ, I have been hit," and the whole thing went out over the radio. My wingman came in and asked, "Are you all right?" And like some kind of hero, I answered, Yeah, I am fine." Ground control picked me up next. "Can you make it back behind our lines?" they asked. I told them I could. When I got back, everyone was waiting like I had just returned from death's door. They pulled me out of the cockpit and rushed a doctor over. He asked, "Where are you wounded?" I pointed at my forehead. He looked at it and said, "I cut myself worse than that shaving this morning." Turned out it was nothing but a tiny scratch. The red I saw was from burst blood vessels in my eye. That was it. After that, every once in a while during later flights, the guys would get on the radio and joke, "Jesus Christ, I have been wounded." They never let you forget mistakes like that. Another time we were escorting British Lancaster bombers. I spotted Messerschmitt 109s crossing ahead of us and thought, finally, I was about to get into a real dogfight, maybe even shoot a couple down. I thought that was where the glory was. But as soon as I focused on them, I checked my rearview mirror and saw two Messerschmitt 109s right behind me. I remembered what my instructor had said. If you ever get in trouble, throttle one engine back, shove the other one forward, hit the opposite rudder, and yank the yoke all the way back. So I did exactly that. I do not know what happened in those few seconds, but when I came out of the maneuver, there were no aircraft anywhere around me. Then I looked down and saw 4 Messerschmitts just above the cloud layer. I thought, all right, I will go down and take out all 4 of them. I dove straight at them, but they dropped into the clouds. I like to tell myself they saw me and ran, but realistically, they were probably heading into the clouds anyway. I chased one of them, and he spotted me. We started turning in what looked like a Loughborough circle, neither one of us able to get a clear shot. Then he rolled onto his back and dropped into the clouds below. I stayed right side up and stuck behind him. When we broke out of the clouds, I realized we were out of altitude. He hit the ground. I managed to get a photograph of the crash, so I received credit for the victory. That ended up being my only dogfight. I did not actually shoot the man down, but he crashed, so in my mind I drove him right into the ground. In the months after the D-Day landings, the Allied forces kept pushing forward, slowly driving the German army back across Europe. Everyone seemed convinced that the war against Adolf Hitler would be wrapped up by Christmas. But the brutal winter of 1944 and the desperate last German offensive through the Ardennes brought everything to a halt. The Battle of the Bulge dragged on for more than a month, and victory was pushed well into 1945. There was something I will never forget. I think it was near Verdun. When the first snows fell, you could look down and actually see the outline of no man's land from the First World War. The shadows on the snow showed the zigzag shape of the old trenches. You could even pick out the shell holes. I remember looking down and saying, "Holy crow, this really is World War I all over again." The land was so empty, so dead-looking, that it almost did not seem real. The most frightened I ever was happened on a mission where we were ordered to dive bomb a rail yard. I watched the first group go in, and when they dropped down toward their targets, the hills lit up with crossfire. It looked like somebody had poured molten metal across the air. There was so much ammunition flying that I could not understand how anybody survived. But the others went down, and when it was my turn, I followed. Somehow I came out without a scratch, and so did everyone else. I looked back afterward and thought, there is no way we should have made it through that. The whole hillside was alive with fire. And yet, every one of us got out. Other times, you never even see what hits you. There is no pattern to any of it. But our squadron did not always come home whole. Before every mission, you knew it might be the last time you saw a friend. There were 4 of us who shared a room. Dan Morwood from Minneapolis, Bill Mason from Brockton, Massachusetts, and John Lund from Ensign, Kansas. We used to tease John about his hometown. There is no such place as Ensign, Kansas, we would say. John kept insisting there was. One day he brought out the Ensign newspaper. It was only a single sheet of paper. See, he said, it exists. Turned out the whole town was basically a crossroads with a silo and a general store. But yes, it had a newspaper. We finally told him, all right, you win. John was just a genuinely good guy. Later, when we were flying P-47s, we were on our way back from a mission when a burst of German 88s shot John down. There was snow on the ground. We never saw a parachute. We just saw his airplane explode. We were sure he had been killed. I gathered up his belongings, handed his liquor over to his crew, and went through the rest to make sure there was nothing that would embarrass him. With John, that was never going to be a problem. He was one of the nicest men I ever knew. I even took his leather WW2 jacket. I do not know why. His name was painted on it, just like all of ours. I had no reason to keep it, but I held on to it anyway. When the war finally ended, I headed home on a Victory ship. It took 10 days to cross the Atlantic. We arrived in Boston, and from there they brought us down to Taunton, to Fort Miles Standish. I finally got access to a telephone and called home, telling my folks I would be back in a couple of days. When I reached home and knocked on the door, it opened, and there stood John Lund, right in my house. I stared at him and said something like, "Son of a gun, you are supposed to be dead. What are you doing here?" I almost fainted. Here was the man we all thought had been killed, standing in my doorway in Newton, Massachusetts, looking perfectly alive. Later I learned what had happened. When he bailed out, he hit the horizontal stabilizer somewhere along his side, and then came down in a field. We never saw his parachute because it was white against the snow. German soldiers found him and handed him over to the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. They thought he had a broken leg and did the best they could with wooden supports and paper bandages. When American forces eventually came through and liberated that hospital, they realized his injury was far more serious than a simple break. He was sent back to the United States, and the surgery he needed was done in Framingham, Massachusetts. It took 4 separate operations to fix John's injuries, and they did them one at a time. While he was waiting between surgeries, he made a trip into Boston and looked up my father's name. He called the house. My dad answered the phone, and he was already getting emotional. John said, "My name is John Lund. Do you have a son flying with the 367th? My dad said yes, and that he knew exactly who John was. Then he asked him where he was and what had happened. John explained everything, and my father told him, "Well, if you have some time before your next surgery, come stay with us." So John moved into my sister's room while she was away at college. And let me tell you, he was living like a king. My dad kept pouring him drinks. My mother was washing his clothes, and they treated him like another son in our house in Newton, Massachusetts. When I finally got home and saw him there, it still felt unreal. I told him, "You know, I have your A2 jacket." As soon as I said it, his eyes filled with tears. He told me that was the one thing he truly wished he could get back. And somehow I had it. I still do not know why I grabbed that jacket, but for whatever reason, I kept it. Anyway, that is my story. It is the one I love telling the most. After the war ended, I kept flying. It stayed in my blood. On my 99th birthday, They let me co-pilot a P-51 Mustang. I could hardly believe it. All my life, I stayed grateful that the United States Army Air Corps had given me the chance to live out the dream I had as a boy. I used to dream about being a fighter pilot. I dreamed it again and again. And somehow it happened. I was thrilled. But flying could be wild. You could be strafing a train, pick out one freight car to hit, and suddenly the whole thing blows up right in your face. You fly straight through the flames, and the heat hits you like nothing else. All you can say is, whoa. It sounds strange to admit it now, but there was something about that rush. That adrenaline shot through you like lightning. And you were young, just a kid. When I took off in that airplane, I felt like the happiest man in the world. They could have killed me, but I was flying a P-38, and that filled me with pure joy.